The fire is, quote, out of control. All residents evacuate now. And that's where we begin tonight with ABC's Clayton Sandell on the scene with that urgent effort now underway. They say the fire is now headed to populated areas.
Tonight, an urgent effort underway right now to get families out of harm's way across Southern California. Powerful, fast-moving, destructive wildfires burning up.
On November 15th of 2008, Yorba Linda, California was affected by the most destructive wildfire the area has ever seen. Wildfires are no joke, and even though it seems a new one is started in California every other week, the experiences of fear, uncertainty, and memory, all shaped from these fires, don't get any easier for the people they affect. For the community of Yorba Linda, one of the phrases they would use to describe the horrific 10 days they experienced is, "You had to be there." Therefore, as one who experienced it, I can attempt to describe the memory of those long 10 days. At just over the age of 14, my family and I were making our way back from my sister's soccer game when a large pillar of smoke was seen coming from our neighborhood. As we drove up our hill, all that could be seen were two-story flames racing towards houses, ash so dense it could have been night, and the sounds of horns and sirens so loud you could barely hear yourself think. With tears in my eyes and adrenaline coursing through my body, I ran upstairs to fill a black trash bag with clothes and valuables, and 60 seconds later we were out the door. I remember driving away from the home I grew up in, only to turn around and see the flames that not even a two-story house could eclipse, crawling up behind it, and not knowing if I would have a home to live in the next time I came down that street. For the next 10 days, we lived on couches of family and friends, only to be evacuated time and time again. But when the fire was over and the dust had finally settled, we made our way back to what we were hoping would still be a home. As we drove up our hill, all I remember seeing was family after family, crying in each other's arms as they stood in front of a debris-filled lot where their house used to stand, and wondering if that was about to be us. Filled with relief and a little bit of guilt, our house emerged fully intact as we rounded the corner of our street. But we were one of the lucky ones. In total, the fire lasted for 10 days, gave life-threatening injuries to 14 firefighters, and burned just over 30,000 acres along with 314 homes, 43 outbuildings, and 4 commercial properties. The community of Yorba Linda, however, proved to be one of resilience, as they developed a motto of "We will never forget and we will rebuild." Unfortunately, just as those 10 terrifying days faded further and further into the past, so was the memory people swore never to forget. In fact, the memory of the 2008 fire, despite the horrific experiences the community faced, is only being kept alive and sparked back into the minds of the community in instances where another fire is started and talked about in California. Although the community lives on sacred ground, has restored lost parts of the community like Box Canyon Park, and attempted to create a place of remembrance, the Freeway complex fire is still being erased from memory due to the lack of interaction in the community. At first thought, it almost seemed as if creating a way to remember the event would be easy considering the sense of sacred ground. Sacred ground generally refers to the land or space a given event or tragedy happens on, therefore making it sacred. In the case of the Freeway complex fire, all 30,305 acres of land that were burned now become sacred ground for this event. For a large amount of time, the charred hills, rubbled houses, and mudslid roads served as a daily reminder to never forget. However, as trees grew back and houses were rebuilt, the only reminder left was the sacred ground you stood on. Unfortunately, the sacred ground begins to lose meaning when there's no visual representation to remind you of what once happened on that ground. Therefore, although the community lives on sacred ground, without a way of noticing it every day, the memory begins to fade. The community of Yorba Linda, however, noticed that issue arising and made an adjustment to implement a visual representation of "We will never forget" in a place that was far from being forgotten. This place happens to be one of the most iconic places in Yorba Linda, and at the time was a family hotspot by the name of Box Canyon Park. This park was unique in the fact that it was built by the Yorba Linda community in the early 2000s. When it was finished, every family painted a tile that was then placed as part of the walled entrance to the park. Unfortunately, when the Freeway complex fire came through, the entire park was destroyed, including the wall of tiles. After Box Canyon burnt down, the community felt as if a large part of their memories were destroyed as well. Due to the significance it had on the community, this became the place Yorba Linda would attempt to memorialize the fire of 2008. In the exact location as before, the wall was reassembled with the shrapnel of the original tiles that were destroyed in the fire. Above the mosaic wall reads the text, "Pieces of the Past." When looking at this attempt to create memory, it does a great job of utilizing pieces of the original wall, just like the chairs of the Oklahoma City bombing site, using original pieces from the building in the seated areas of the chairs. However, unlike the Oklahoma City bombing memorial, this wall was attempting to be the sole form of memorialization for this event, and therefore it's important to notice the lack of specificity. To a community member, they may understand the meaning, But to someone coming from another city or state, questions would arise such as, what does this mean? Or what event is this referring to? In an attempt to answer some of those questions, a plaque was added just to the right of the wall several months later to give context to the mosaic wall. The plaque does a decent job in telling the story of what happened in Yorba Linda on November 15, 2008. It goes on to mention the loss of, quote, our beloved Box Canyon Park, and explains the mosaic wall and what it stands for, as well as the park's new design and how it pays tribute to the old park. Although the plaque does a decent job of summarizing the event and purpose, the big question is, do people even take the time to interact with the piece? The main reason anyone would go to Box Canyon Park would be to have their kids run around or to have a barbecue with some family and friends. Therefore, a majority of the time, people prove to be uninterested by the wall and plaque and simply walk by it. Without the characteristic of captivation and people's willingness to interact with it, the plaque as well as the wall prove to be entirely useless when attempting to provide memory for the community. Not only are the people walking by the plaque ignoring it, but the amount of people walking by it in the first place are drastically decreasing. In 2008, the Yorba Linda community was young, fairly new, and family-oriented. Although that still may be true to some extent, a lot of the people who had first-hand experience with the fire no longer go to Box Canyon Park anymore. As the youth of Yorba Linda grows up and moves out, families and individuals have less and less of a reason to go to Box Canyon Park. Therefore, not only are the individuals who experienced the fire moving away, but those who experienced it and still live in the city aren't attending the place meant to remind them of what happened. For those who no longer interact with the Box Canyon site, the only reminder they get is in a moderate form of PTSD. Every time another California wildfire is announced and followed on the news, myself as well as any other person who lived through the Freeway complex fire are immediately reminded of the tragedy that happened in 2008. That is not how memory is meant to be remembered. That is like saying the only time you think about 9/11 is when another terrorist attack occurs. Memory in memorial is meant to be something that you think about frequently, and not something only brought up by reoccurring tragedy. Therefore, even though the community of Yorba Linda lives on sacred ground, attempted to create a place of remembrance, and have a plethora of individuals who have had first-hand accounts with the event, the Freeway complex fire has been fading from memory. When people visit Box Canyon Park, the lack of interaction with the space of memory is a problem in and of itself. But even more so, with only a small amount of the community members actually visiting the space, the memory of the Freeway complex fire will continue to be erased from the members of the community affected by the fire of 2008.